name is Lester Caliste, New Orleans, Louisiana. I played the trombone.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the 7th Ward part of the city, below Canal Street.
Were there musicians in your family?
I only had one musician, but a singer. She was a part-time singer also, but she made it famous, Jean Knight. Her name actually is Jean Harris. It was my father's sister. And she made Mr. Big Stuff.
It's pretty famous.
Mm-hmm.
What did your parents do?
My father was a postman for the Postal Service, and my mother was a school teacher. And they never did play any music or anything like that. They just were good people.
What kind of records did they play in your house?
Really, at that time, we had mostly radio. I don't even think we had a record player, but mostly the radio, because I'm talking about the early 50s. And during that time, they used to play the music of the day, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Stan Kenton. And I was always amazed about the trombone, and especially the trombone section of Stan Kenton Orchestra, and the other orchestras too. And so that's how I started having an interest for the trombone.
What was it about the trombone?
The sound. It had a pure sound. It wasn't necessarily like a trumpet, but because the trombone is actually a big trumpet. That's really what it is. But it was just a sound.
I think it's interesting that it can be a melodic instrument and a percussive instrument.
Right.
You can do both. It has a huge range.
Yes.
What kind of music did you hear in your neighborhood?
I didn't hear any except I lived 4 blocks from St. Augustine School, and I would hear the marching band. But I wasn't born in the Trimby, and I wasn't really familiar with the brass bands until in the late 70s. So mostly I was exposed to St. Augustine High School marching band, and I started trombone at 11 years old. And
in school?
In school.
Mm-hmm.
And I played in the first year. I played at in the school Rivers Frederick School. In the second year I played, and then Mr. Hampton heard about me because he used to give me lessons. I went to private lessons, and so I applied for St. Augustine High School, and I was accepted there, and I played in the band. And it was good exposure because I played in the concert band, I played in the marching band. It was good exposure.
What kind of teacher was he?
He was a good teacher. Also, Mr. Winchester, he was a brass teacher. And Mr. Hampton actually was an oboist. And he played in a band called the Royal Deuce of Rhythm. And during that period of time, we would go to different dances, and the Royal Dukes were playing. It was a society band that played during the carnival time, and also it played for dances, and they're very popular.
Where would these dances be? What kind of venues?
Well, at that time I would go to Xavier Prep. They used to call it, it would be at the Xavier University actually, the dances. All the parochial schools have their dances at Xavier University. They called it the Barn. And this is back in the 60s, mid-60s. No, early 60s. And St. Mary's, they would have dances there. And it was a place to have social gathering and dancing.
What kind of repertoire, what kind of songs were you playing then?
They would play the Royal Dukes would be playing the music of the day. Top 10.
Top 10, rhythm and blues,
right.
All of that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And you went to St. Aug?
I went to St. Augustine for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
What was the point that you realized that you wanted to be a professional musician, that you wanted to follow that path?
Well, then again, I had graduated by 1965, and they needed some players to play in the little concerts. Wardell Kazare gave concerts, and then they had Ellis Marcellus, he gave concerts, and various people, James Black, people, June Gardner, and so they needed players, especially a trombone section. And so the person to go to was Mr. Hampton, and so he recommended all his trombone players. So it was like 4. It was a stage band, and they had 4 trombones, 4 trumpets, 5 saxophone in a rhythm section.
What local trombonist did you look up to?
Well, I always looked up to Lewis Nelson, Frog Joseph. I'm not too familiar with the first real big. They used to call him Big Jim. I'm not too familiar with, because he started with the Preservation Hall in 1960 or 61, but I'm not familiar with his playing.
You went to Xavier.
I went to Xavier. Yes.
Who did you study music with there?
Okay, I actually was a liberal arts major, and I had a concentration in history and political science. And so that didn't work out for me, so I decided I'm going to go into music, finish out, because I already had all the prerequisite courses. And so only thing I had to do was certify myself in music performance. And the first trombone teacher I had was Mr. James Lewis from Chicago. And I had Johnny Fernandez. He was a member of the Brunius family, and he knew a lot. He was a trumpet player, and he was very good. And also Mr. Lewis too.
Mm-hmm. So after Xavier?
Well, I want to go back to 1965.
Let's do it.
During that year, well, I knew the repertoire of Wardell Kazare. Mainly, he was the director of the jazz band, of the stage band. And so I was my first recording was behind June Gardner, and the album name was 99 Plus One. It's in 65. Also, I did Badfootin' by Robert Parker in 1965. And so now when we talk about Xavier, I went there from 64 to 65, 64 to 69, and I really didn't get into like the music department until 66, late 66. And from, so we can jump, during that time I was also working with Alan Toussaint on his sessions.
How did you first meet Alan?
Well, through Mr. Lewis. He was the trombone player, and he went out of town, he left town, so he recommended me to Alan Toussaint.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, and during that period of time, I say it was late 66 or maybe 67, we did recordings. What they would do, they call you up and ask you if you can make a session. You just go, know who you're playing for, you just go ahead and make the session, and that was it.
What was your chemistry like with Alan?
Oh, he was a great person, and he was a perfectionist. And he always dressed dapper, but he was a good person.
How did your playing styles work together?
It worked good because I knew how to play in a section or how to work with the musicians, and I never did overblow someone else. I always did, in a cohesive manner, try to do a good job.
When did you start with the Postal Service?
I didn't start the Postal Service till 1973, but I can tell you briefly, at 69, in 1969, I had to go on active duty. I was called up with the Navy, and I had already been in the Navy since 1966, in reserves, but I had to go in 1969, and so I did my 2 years. I could have played in the Navy band, but they wanted me to extend 2 years. So I said, let me just get it over with. And so I came back in 1971, and that's when I started playing with the stage bands, a lot of stage bands, Clyde Kerr Sr., and they had what they called the Tapas Orchestra. And then I resumed recording with Alan Toussaint.
What kind of venues were you playing at that time in the early 70s?
Okay, with the stage bands, it was always mostly during the carnival season that people would have their carnival balls and different little concerts. And I still went back to play with Ward Alcacer, the big band, and jazz, stage music. With Clyde Kerr Sr. was the top 10. And also during this time I played with a band called the Music Factory. And well, I was at the local nightclubs, the 77 Club and JT's. It was located in Great-Town.
You've done every kind of music. What's your favorite repertoire to play?
My favorite repertoire would be standards and traditional New Orleans music, because the traditional New Orleans music is happy music. Everybody be so happy to hear, especially at the Preservation Hall. You know, you appreciate the audience. And those two, and I like all types of music, you know, and I like playing all types of music. But those two, since I'm doing it on a regular basis, I like the traditional New Orleans music, and I like standards.
What about Olympia Brass Band? When did you start playing with Olympia?
I started playing with Olympia about 1966, and that was an outgrowth of the Tapas Orchestra. That's another orchestra I played with, and the leader of the Tapas was Milton Baptiste, and it had Edmund Fauché, he played trumpet, and Gerald Joseph. And so one day they asked us if we wanted to play with the Olympia, because Baptiste was already playing with Olympia, but they needed trombone players and young trombone players that can walk the parades and, you know, do the funerals and stuff. So I said, yeah, I'll just go ahead for the experience, you know. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. It was part of my therapy. Music was, playing with them was a, you know, a treat. You work all day, and then you come back and have a little gig with Olympia, and it was good.
Second lines are a special kind of therapy.
Yes.
They're very important.
Yes. And it was my first exposure to New Orleans culture. I'm talking about in a trimming, because where I grew up was for the most part quiet.
With Olympia, we talked to Leroy Jones yesterday, and he said at that time Olympia was the hottest band in town.
It was.
They had a very specific sound. Do you want to talk about that sound?
Basically, the sound would be the beat of the bass drum. And it started when I joined the Olympia. They had Booker T. Glass was the bass player, the bass drum player, and who else? A fellow named Mr. Jefferson. But then his son, popularly known as Papa, when he died, he was over 100 years old when he died. Papa took the bass drum and he started playing the bass drum, because Papa used to play the snare drum, and then Papa started playing the bass drum. So basically, at first, this is in '66, it was mostly the traditional brass band playing, and then Baptiste had been on the road, and he was a rhythm and blues, a lot of rhythm and blues, and the band started being more innovative, introducing rhythm and blues tunes to the repertoire.
Was there any pushback from that? Were people upset about not playing a traditional repertoire at that time?
No, because it was entertaining.
It was the hottest band in town.
Mhm.
And how long did you play with them?
I played with them from 66 to 69, and I had a break in because I was in the military, and I came out in 71 to 81. I played with them, and then I came back. I played with the Olympia Serenaders in 2001 at the Preservation Hall. Now, in 1975, I played with the Olympia Serenaders too, but that band consisted of Baptiste, Mr. Dejon, Sweet Emma, Chester Jones on drums. And after 6 months, that's when I joined the Postal Service. They put me on a night tour. And so I had to discontinue.
Do you remember the first time you ever went to Preservation Hall? You ever came
The
here?
first time was I was playing with the Olympia Brass Band, and it was on Mardi Gras Day. It had to be around 68. And after we played for Zulu, that was the first time I ever played for, it was either Zulu or Rex. That was the first time I played, whatever organization, that was the first time I played. And after that, Alan Jaffe said, well, we're gonna just march through the quarters and we'll play, play for tips, And so we did that. We came back to the Preservation Hall. That was the first time I had ever been in Preservation Hall. Because I've heard a lot about it, but I never did. Well, I never did play it until 75. But that's the first time I came back. We split it up, the money, and that was it.
You knew Alan Jaffe well.
I wouldn't say well. I was an employee of him, and he played sometimes over at the hall with the Olympia Serenaders too. He played bass, and he played what they call an E-flat bass. Because at one time I tried to play it, I said, oh, the fingering is all different. So that was that with that. But no, he was a fair man. I can say that about at Preservation Hall. They always been fair people and, congenial people. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the first time you met Patti Labelle?
I never met Patti Labelle.
You just recorded?
I recorded. The way that's done, they'll do the tracks for the rhythm section, and then they'll bring in the horns. And the only member of Labelle that I met was Nona Hendrix. And I think it was about 2 days it took to do that recording with the horn tracks.
You played on Lady Marmalade?
Yes.
So it took 2 days to record?
I think about 2 days to record, and it was for Labelle, and the name of the album is Nightbirds. And then the next year in 75, we did Phoenix, which was a equally good album, but it didn't have a show tune. But for music, it was very good.
Like we were talking about, you've played on some really big hits. You played on Southern Nights, you played on Lady Marmalade, a number of others. Do you remember the first time you ever heard yourself on the radio?
I'd have heard myself. I can't answer that. I don't know.
Well, you've heard many of your songs on the radio over the years.
Right, right. And Southern Nights was done in 1973. And the horn section was myself, Clyde Kerr Jr., and a fellow named Alvin Thomas, and Mr. Bloom. Carl Bloom, a baritone saxophonist, he was my mathematics teacher over at St. Aug. And he's a good musician.
When you started working and changed to nights for the Postal Service, you started recording more than performing, right?
Right. That's correct. Mm-hmm. I was able to do a lot of recordings during the daytime, where normally if I was working in the daytime, I would have to work. And that's like I said, I've always been like a part-time person, but during that time I did mostly recordings You had Jackie Miller, I believe. He came. He was from Britain. He was from England. Jackie Lomax. Different people. And as I said before, they never tell you or give you any information who you're recording for. You just go ahead and do it. Earl King, I did the Trick Bag, and I did, that might have been in the 60s. In the 70s, I think, a parade, some kind of parade song. It was a hit for him, regional.
Do you think about recording and performing differently?
Right now?
In the way that you play, do you approach it differently? Do you think about it differently?
Well, I haven't recorded since the 90s. But as I say, I'm just part-time right now. I came back a year and a half ago, and I do get a chance to play on Saturdays. But with the Preservation Hall, what they do, they always have their own, the bands, different bands almost every night. And, well, I can't go and tell them to take this man out and put me in. I can't do that, nothing like that. So what I'll do, if somebody has something to do and they'll call me, I'll play.
Mm-hmm. You left for Katrina and you were gone a long time.
Right.
Where did you go?
I went to McKinney, Texas. My wife had her daughter lived there, and so we settled in McKinney, Texas.
And you were gone for years. I mean...
Right, I was gone for 5 years. Yes.
Did you think about not coming back? Did you always want to come back to New Orleans?
Well, this is something that she wanted to do. I always wanted to come back to New Orleans, but I tried to appease her. So, but it didn't work out really, because she wanted to come back. When her mother moved back to New Orleans, she said, "No, I got to go with my mother." And so that's the history on that. You know, so eventually, I came back to New Orleans. But I've been taking care of my mother also all these years, and right now she's 93, and so it's difficult. And that's about the main reason why when I came back in 2009, that's the main reason why I didn't resume my music career.
Because
to help
you were
out.
there. Mm-hmm. Did you come back to the same neighborhood?
No, I lost my home. My mother lost her home. I had to reestablish. So I'm living in Gentilly. So, which is good. It's good for making the jobs in the quarters. It's 15 minutes away. So that's a plus.
You brought in some pictures I want to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about this one.
Okay, someone sent us this picture. This was taken at the Preservation Hall, let's say for all intents, about 1995. And I was playing with Kid Chic. He was a trumpet player that played.
What was Kid Chic like?
Oh, he's always happy.
Yeah?
One of the most happiest person I've ever seen in my life. And he always had his cigar, real old style, you know what I mean? Back from the 20s and 30s.
What was his playing like?
Well, his playing was, it was entertaining. It was entertaining, and he would sing, and he could direct a band. It was a very good band.
What about this photo?
Okay, this photo was recently taken last summer.
It's a good promotional shot.
Right.
Yeah. What's your favorite group to play with? You're back, you've been back for a year and a half, you've started playing again. Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite group of musicians to play with now?
Yeah, the Preservation Hall. Or any one of the groups. I played during the summertime. A lot of the musicians go out of town, so I get a chance to play with different musicians. And I can't say I don't have a favorite, but just about all the bands, I try to fit in and make something happen, musically.
Do you want to take a break and then we'll play?
Okay.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. I'm gonna do Honeysuckle Rose, and then I'm gonna do a little of Do You Know What It Means to Miss New Orleans? Giving y'all a little concert. Okay, we'll do a short, a little something. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Do you know what it means to Miss New Orleans?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
How would you describe the New Orleans sound? The New Orleans musical sound? How would you describe it?
Oh, I would describe it as number one, happy music, and very, very soulful. Very soulful in the sense that it embodies the spirit of the New Orleans people. I mean, you can hear New Orleans when you play New Orleans music. People want to clap and tap their foot, and it's just a happy music. And New Orleans music is an American music, and that's one thing that we have that we can say that we started. It's not like symphonic music, the Europeans. But they have elements, in New Orleans music, you have European and African influences, and sometimes Cuban influence. So that's my description of New Orleans music.
What about a specific New Orleans trombone style?
That's something that you have to develop, and I had to develop, and I developed my style through playing with Harold Dejon band, the Olympia brass band. But it is you have to study New Orleans style, because I could play a little bit progressive when I was studying and playing music and the rhythm and blues. But that style, you just have to do it. You have to do it. And over many parades that I played, in funerals that I played, you have to have that feeling, and you know, it takes a little while. You can't come off the street and just play.
What about Harold Dijon? Do you have what's a memory of him, or what do you want people to know about him?
Oh, he was always he was a businessman. Both him and Baptiste, they were businessmen, and but they were like happy people, you know, nice to be around. You know, the kind of person you want to drink a beer with, you know, and they were nice people.
When you were recording with Toussaint, where were you recording?
Okay, first I recorded at Cosmo, Matassa. That's where we recorded 99+1, June Gardner, and several other albums. And then we recorded, after I came out of the Navy, we recorded, that was 1971, he was doing recordings in Bogalusa studio in the country. And then Alan Toussaint, along with Marshall Seahorn, bought a piece of property in Gentilly, and they called it Sea Saint. And that was about 1972, 73.
And what songs did you record at Crescent?
Many, many. I played behind 2 albums with Labelle, that was the name of the group, which included Patti Labelle and Nona Hendrix. I played Southern Nights, that was in 73. And they had some British rockers, Jackie Lomas and Miller, Frankie Miller, we did their albums. We did commercials. There's a local Box root beer commercial that we did, and they had a beer called Old English 800. We did that, and many more recordings. I really don't remember.
Big hits too. We talked about Lady Marmalade.
Right, that was my notable recording.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What haven't we talked about that you want to talk about?
Sorry, I got it.
Whatever you want to talk about in your notes.
Oh, I did want to talk about the 80s. Briefly. In the 80s, I was working full-time for the Postal Service, and then I was working in the daytime. I wasn't recording like I used to record. So I got with this band called the Original Crescent City Jazz Band. And they played mainly for uptown residents in the Garden District. They did played on boats for the conventions. And that's when I started learning the different standards, all the standards, because people would ask you. I worked at Mr. B's, and I worked at Commander's Palace, and people would ask you for different tunes, and so you had to know them. So, but that was part of our repertoire, and also we played the New Orleans music. And I did recordings in the 1990s. I did a lot of jazz recordings. Excuse me again. That's when I played for Sammy Remington. Did 2 albums with him. Who else? I forgot where my music is.
I wanted to talk about your international tours, too.
I played for Kit Simmons, Lionel Furbo's, and are you familiar with Lionel Furbo's?
I am.
Yes. Incidentally, that's the neighborhood that I grew up in. He lived 1 block from me, and I never did know or had an inclination that he was a musician. He was just a hard-working, quiet man, and I didn't But I started working with him at the Palm Coat. I played a few jobs over there. And Reginald Kohler, he was a trumpet player that played over here.
You've done international tours. What was the first time you went overseas? Oops. Sorry, all.
Okay, what comes up, this would be in the 1990s because I couldn't get off of work. I gave up on 4 trips to Japan, 3 or 4 trips to Europe. So with the Preservation Hall, I always was able to get 2 weeks off in the summertime. So I played in Zurich, Switzerland. I did 6 jobs over there, and it was at a restaurant. But it was great. We did do that for a week, and then I always made sure I had a regular vacation for my family, and we used to go to Cancun. And that was nice. I've been to Switzerland 6 times. I've been to Germany 1 time. I played with the Hall. We played at the Volkswagen factory. Then we made a little tour to Sweden. We came down to Denmark, and we played. I think we played in Switzerland that year too. But that's about the extent. Now, after I retired from the Postal Service in 2004, I had contract to play a job in Thailand and Portugal. And that was after the storm. And the storm hit us. I was in Texas. I was living in Texas, and I had already verbally told the Hall that I was going to play it. So I didn't want to back down. So I played it with about 2 weeks and came back home.
What are your favorite audiences to play in front of?
All type of audiences. It's so long the audience appreciate the music. And it's always good to play, for kids because they're learning. But my audience, my favorite audience is when anybody who appreciate the music. And it's easy to see because they be clapping and stomping on their foot. Not stomping, but patting their foot. So it makes me happy. When they're happy, I'm happy.
You've played with so many musicians. I mean, you have a 50-year-long career. Are there any New Orleans musicians you haven't played with yet that you want to?
I can't think of any, but most of the most of the people are deceased. And I played with Chocolate Milk. That was a local, rhythm and blues band. But most of the people are deceased. Right now, I can't think of anybody special.
Are you working on any recordings?
No, I'm not. Right now, I take it at this. I'm semi-retired, and so I'd be happy to come around and play, at the Hall. And sometimes I get a chance to play at the Palm Coat restaurant. But it's mostly to see the fellas, and say hello to people, and that's what I'm doing right now. But I'm not recording anything right now.
Is there anything else